Hey everybody, this is Vegan Theology, episode 60 with Kevin and Sarah Hale.
Hi, Kevy.
Hey, what's going on?
I'm good.
Yeah,
We're good.
we're good.
We hope you're good too out there. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
We're going to move on with Marcella Newell's doctoral thesis.
Tikkun Olam and Jürgen Moltmann's Theology of Hope. And I guess it's called Repairing the World. Repairing the World, Tikkun Olam, and Jürgen Moltmann's Theology of Hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In today's chapter, we basically get the history of this idea, the history of the concept of Tikkun Olam from biblical texts all the way to the 21st century.
Yeah.
So we're just going to take a broad arc of where this idea came from, how it developed, different takes on it, and where we are today with this concept.
Right. Up until, right before Moltmann picks it up and does what he does with it. So.
Yeah, next chapter will be all about Moltmann's rediscovery of Tikkun Olam.
Yeah.
All right. So he begins this chapter actually with the 21st century understanding of Tikkun Olam. But he quotes Rabbi Jonathan Sacks as well as Moltmann, and I really enjoyed what they both said about Tikkun Olam. So I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
He writes, few have been able to summarize the contemporary understanding of Tikkun Olam as well as Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, and his definition can serve as a basic benchmark of the early 21st century conception of the term. And this is his quote. Equally characteristic of the rabbinic literature is the refusal on the part of the sages to see the sufferings and injustices of the world as given, unchangeable, part of the divine will. Jews did not believe with the Manichaeans or Gnostics. And I did look up Manichaeans. They were in some ways similar to the Gnostics. They were a very dualistic black and white. Everything was a black and white duality, but they believed in the release of the spirit from matter. And they were around the same time as the Gnostics, the 3rd century AD. So Jews did not believe with the Manichaeans or Gnostics that the physical world is a vale of tears to be transcended. It is the world God made and pronounced good. On the other hand, its failings, inequities, and corruptions are neither inevitable nor to be accepted with resignation. It is this ability to hold together a sense of the goodness of creation and the evil it contains, thanking God for the one, working in God's name against the other, that marks Judaism as an activist, future-oriented faith. Tikkun Olam involves the recognition that the world does need repair rather than stoic acceptance or ascetic denial. So those are some of the things we're coming up against. We're coming up against the dualistic Gnosticism that matter is evil and only spirit is good. We're saying, no, it's all good. The materiality is good.
Yeah.
Which makes me think of the incarnation.
Yeah.
That's what one of the things the incarnation proves is that God cares about materiality. And we're coming up against a stoic acceptance. This is just the way the world is.
Right.
And we're coming up against ascetic denial, just removing ourselves from the world as much as we can. And you could see all of those tendencies.
Yeah.
Within the church, within us in the past.
Right.
So, it's holding this tension between, no, creation is good and the things that are going wrong are not inevitable and we are working in God's name to change them. Marcello summarizes this here. Sacks' synthetic summary is particularly useful as it gives an outline of what Tikkun Olam had come to signify within the Western Jewish community at the beginning of the 21st century. and comes from an important Jewish interlocutor. Here one can also note the foundational concepts which were linked to Tikkun Olam by the beginning of the century, namely the original goodness of God's creation, the opposition to an escapist and dualistic view of the world, termed Gnostic or Manichaean, the future orientation of Judaism, and the activist nature of Tikkun Olam. It is the struggle against the world that is, in the name of the world that could be.
Yeah.
And then he connects that with Moltmann. As can be seen, the cluster of ideas found here in Sachs' discussion of Tikkun Olam are remarkably similar and consistent with those found in Moltmann's theological trajectory, starting with theology of hope.
According to Newell, Moltmann underlined how his theology was essentially a retrieval of the Jewish promise of the resurrection of the body and the hope for the ultimate repair of the world, which transforms the present. This is a quote from Moltmann. When I wrote Theology of Hope more than 20 years ago, I started with the assumption that Christian hope since Augustine had been reduced by the Church to saving the soul in a heaven beyond death, and that, in this reduction, it has lost its life-renewing and world-changing power. I focused on the biblical promise of the new creation, of the resurrection of the body, and of the new heaven and the new earth in which the righteousness of God lives. Well,
that's fascinating
Yeah.
to me, the fact that he's saying that, in his view, Christian hope has been reduced by the church since Augustine to simply one of just saving the soul for heaven. And in doing that, we've reduced Christianity, its life-renewing and world-changing power.
Yeah.
And for him, it's all focused on the resurrection and then the new earth.
If you think about it, when Augustine lived, he lived from 354 to 430, which is kind of around the time, it's a little after when kind of Rome, the Edict of Milan 313, it's kind of when Rome kind of took over the church, or the church co-opted itself with empire. And so here we are, right? It plays right into this.
Wow.
So, and I know in my mind, and I know we've talked about this on the podcast, it's this sense of I'm always trying to get back to an early church understanding of Christianity, first century. I think we've used that term, first century Christianity, because in some ways that it's in its purest form there. Now, of course, that might sound naive, right? Because history moves on and culture and language, they all change. And now we have the church that we have, but it's become so connected to empire. And as we know now in the United States, especially with Christian nationalism, and we were watching an interview last evening with Chris Hedges on Al Jazeera, and it was just the sense of, like, we've lost our effectiveness. And is it possible to get back to a first century Christianity? I don't know. These are questions I always have. And I think it's one of the reasons I'm enjoying this particular thesis.
Yeah. All right. So he starts with Tikkun Olam as understood in the 21st century by Sachs and Moltmann, but now we need to go all the way back and then forward again. So, All right. So Tikkun Olam, the phrase itself often appears in rabbinical sources and Aramaic sources like the Talmud. And of particular interest to me was that in biblical and these Jewish sources, tikkun, the word, can be translated as to legislate, create laws, or fix injustice. This term encompassed divorce, economic issues, and any legal matter that was deemed unjust, and the modification of which was seen as a way of improving society. In these texts, the concept of Tikkun Olam was described as improving of society, and many of the references regarded the protection of women in divorce cases in which the husband was particularly cruel. In all these rabbinical legal cases, we see Tikkun Olam as an overarching principle which was used to fix legislation in order to create a more just and humane society, with rulings that went beyond the mere technicalities of the law. It really resonates for me that that was a consideration with how they were thinking about making laws in their society.
Yeah.
Jumping ahead a little in history to the 3rd century, we find the Aleinu prayer. This prayer became the standard closing prayer at the end of every Jewish worship service, especially from the 14th century onwards. So this Aleinu prayer became such a deeply entrenched part of the Jewish culture and thinking and education, and it contained concepts of Tikkun Olam. I'll read that prayer now. It is on us to praise the one, for you didn't make us like the nations of the earth, for they pray to what is empty, breath, and emptiness. And we bow before the sovereign of sovereigns, the Holy One, blessed be, who spread out heavens and founded an earth. Therefore we hope for you, Yahweh, our God, to see quickly the manifest glory of your strength, to cause the idols to pass away from the earth and the unbreathing gods to be cut off, to establish a world under the reign of the Almighty, all-nourishing, Shaddai, and all people of all flesh will call on your name, to cause all the wicked of the earth to turn toward you. Marcello writes, the Aleinu prayer hopes for the day in which the world will be perfected under God's kingship, and idolatry will be banished, and creation will be healed. The Aleinu prayer can be seen as a distillate of the overall mission of Judaism to perfect the world under God. Next, Marcello moves to Maimonides, where the concept reappears in different forms in the writings of the great medieval rabbi Maimonides. He's pretty famous.
Yeah, he's a big deal. He's a Torah scholar for the Middle Ages, well known.
From what years?
He was lived from 1138 to 1204.
Okay.
And he's most well known for his, at least in my mind anyway, his Guide for the Perplexed, which I read about when I was reading a view on creation by a physicist.
So he cites Maimonides alluding to this concept of Tikkun Olam in several places. He writes, these texts demonstrate, especially from such an eminent authority within medieval Jewry, such as Maimonides, that the concept was already present within the Jewish theology of the time and was not relegated to the esoteric teachings of the Kabbalah, nor is it simply the fruit of 20th century creative speculation. Maimonides appears to be one of the first sources to explicitly associate his medieval understanding of Tikkun Olam with the coming of Mashiach, or the Messiah, who will transform, repair, fix the whole world. Next, Marcello looks at the Tikkun Olam within the Kabbalah. And I am particularly interested in what is Kabbalah.
Yeah.
I've been acquainted in my life with a couple people who have been interested in Kabbalah, who have studied Kabbalah. So I think that this is of interest to our listeners just because it is of a theological nature. It historically has had significance theologically. So Kabbalah is a Jewish mystical tradition that seeks to understand the hidden nature of God and the universe. And it has influenced Jewish thought and practice since the Middle Ages. Its name comes from the Hebrew word for to receive, reflecting its nature as a tradition passed down from teacher to student. To receive, from teacher to student. Key concepts include the Sephirot, a system of 10 divine emanations through which God interacts with the world, and the Zohar, which is the central text of Kabbalah. So that's just a tiny overview. But it's very interesting. I would kind of spoiler alert, I guess, that in the end, Marcello Newell is going to determine that Tikkun Olam, the concept itself, is really anti-Kabbalistic. So we're going to figure out why he says that. So I'm just going to read a little bit that he wrote here at the beginning of this section, Tikkun Olam in the Kabbalah. The concept of Tikkun Olam was also modified through its encounter with the Kabbalah and its mystical theology. This is a little bit of history here. This is really interesting. The Kabbalah was strongly linked to the persecution, violence, and ostracization the Jews had been subjected to in the Iberian Peninsula and what would later become Spain, with the unification of the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, which had resulted in their final expulsion in 1492. So Jews were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula all the way back in 1492. Some of these exiles sought refuge in Safed in northern Israel, which became a center for Kabbalistic thought. In this sense, the brokenness the Kabbalists perceived in the cosmos was in many ways a projection of their own experiences of suffering and trauma, which they believe could be healed through acts of individual piety and ultimately through a cosmic tikkun. The Kabbalah was, in this sense, a version of cosmic catastrophe, progressively healed by individual deeds, which, though they seemed small and local, mend the world. Lurianic Kabbalah spoke to a Jewry shattered by persecution. The underlining of human deeds, albeit within a retreat to the spheres of mysticism and personal conduct, appears here to be reflective of the Jewish people's perceived abandonment by God. This is a recurring theme that we'll see throughout this historical overview, that in some senses, the perceived abandonment by God colored some of the Jewish thinkers' ideas of Tikkun Olam, that almost like, I guess it's up to us.
Right.
God has abandoned us. It's up to us now
to
fix the world. So that is definitely a thread that runs through the history of this concept. The Jews had been powerless to stop their expulsion, and God himself had not intervened to save them. In this perception of the brokenness of the Jewish experience, there developed the radical idea that God himself, like the world, needed healing.
Wow.
Okay, so that's really interesting. The Kabbalah itself developed initially in the 13th century when its foundational text, the Zohar, was likely written by Rabbi Moses de Leon. So yeah, they have in their tradition this belief that at creation, the universe was created through the contraction of God, or the contraction of God's infinite light, who in this way had made space for his creation to exist. But tragically, in the creative process, the vessels which contained the divine essence proved too fragile and burst open, scattering divine sparks throughout the world. Adam had the possibility of fixing this primordial rupture in creation by choosing to obey God, but instead failed, causing sin and brokenness to enter creation and causing the mixing of spiritual and unspiritual souls. So the goal is then for us to, by obeying God, where Adam failed to, by obeying God, we take these divine sparks back up to the source, or back up to God.
Right. And, you know, I don't know about you, but as soon as I read that, I'm like, oh, this is like all the ancient Near Eastern creation myths, where you had these different gods warring, and there was chaos and there was destruction, and creation somehow emanated out of the battling and the warring and the chaos. And here we are. And so now we're taking on some sort of godlike ability to fix God, to repair God's creation. I don't know. Yeah, for me, this starts to sound like all the other ancient Near Eastern stories. And I think I like the idea of, this is, again, I've said this numerous times, I love the idea of the classic Christian God and all his attributes, and that he created a world in peace that was peaceful.
No, I agree with you that this idea of a broken God who is broken like the world, which comes out of their experience, their human lived experience of feeling abandoned by God. So God must be not perfect.
Right.
God must not be completely powerful or good or something, right? It's the problem of evil.
Right.
And so we get this idea, humans get this idea that God is flawed and broken. And
right. And for me, I'm like, then why do I want to follow a God like that?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, he's not all powerful. He's not all omnipotent. He doesn't have these attributes. He is not the creator and ruler of the universe.
Right.
So I'm like, I'm going to move on to go find wherever that maximally great being is. And if it's not this God, then I'll go wherever he is at.
Yeah.
I mean, this, you know what I mean? This starts to become...
But it's understandable. We're all trying to understand what is going on here.
No, I understand.
And what is God's role and what is our
100%.
role?
And that's been the question from day one. But also, the moment that our hermeneutics diminish the attributes of God, for me, that's like the one thing. Like, I believe in a maximally great being. And the moment that we start to reduce his maximal greatness, then I'm like, I'm going to go be an atheist.
Right.
Oh, all right. Continuing on. The task of humanity, its supreme goal within Lurianic Kabbalah then, was known as Tikkun, and was to seek to gather both the shards of light and the holy souls which had been tragically dispersed at the beginning of creation. Having returned the divine sparks to their original home, the Messiah could then appear, and the cosmos would enter into an era of peace and perfection termed Tikkun Olam, whereas the earlier rabbinical sources and even the Aleinu prayer had given humankind a more marginal role in the repairing of the world. In Lurianic Kabbalah, the onus of repairing the universe lay squarely on humanity's shoulders. Furthermore, while the Kabbalah introduced a radical new understanding of humanity's role in the world, in practice, the means of obtaining tikkun still passed through the traditional mitzvot and obedience to the Torah, only that these traditional laws and precepts took on a deeply new meaning. They were now part and parcel of the universal healing of the world, the raising of divine sparks, and the bringing of ultimate harmony to creation.
So what is Marcello's fundamental criticism of the Kabbalah as it relates to the concept of Tikkun Olam? I think it could be summed up in this little section here. He writes, in reality, it is false to say that Lurianic Kabbalah hopes for the repair of the present material world, as in its dualistic vision, which strongly resembles elements of Gnostic cosmology and eschatology. The goal is to save the spiritual from the material and to bring about an end to this, quote, repugnant and evil creation. So at the end of the day, the Kabbalah in its mysticism is really dualistic. It has a dualistic paradigm that isn't about repairing this present world. It's very similar to Gnosticism, and it's all about saving the spiritual from this material.
Right.
Newell wraps up this little section on the Kabbalah by writing, Moltmann's gradual abandonment of the Kabbalistic variant of Tikkun Olam makes the concept's fundamental premise compatible with his messianic understanding of the world and his polemic against otherworldly or world-denying eschatologies. I really like that phrase, world-denying eschatologies.
Yeah.
That is what we're against right there.
Right.
Is this idea that we can deny this creation.
Well, yeah, that this creation is garbage and it's not worth saving and that we're going to get rescued out of here.
Moving on from the Kabbalah, the next section in this chapter is titled From Eastern European Jewelry to Mordecai Kaplan.
Yeah, and in this section, Marcello Newell, talking about Tikkun Olam, says, I will discuss the concept's evolution in the early modern era through humanistic orthodoxy in Eastern Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries to its echoes within the Zionist movement, and in particular Abraham Isaac Cook's extensive use and elaboration of the idea up to its entry into North American society and politics through the work of Mordecai Kaplan and his disciple Dushkin.
Okay, so we're covering a little bit of ground in this section. He writes, while most of the discussion on Tikkun Olam during its history occurred almost exclusively in Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East, or modern-day Israel, where the majority of Jewish communities were located, During the course of the 20th century, the barycenter, which I looked up, that word means the center of gravity. So during the course of the 20th century, the center of gravity of the discussion shifted to the United States and, a lesser degree, Israel. In this sense, the debate around Tikkun Olam during the 20th century followed the exodus of many German-speaking Jewish rabbis and intellectuals out of Nazi and post-war Germany, as well as present-day Poland, Ukraine, and Russia. As these intellectual and religious leaders relocated to the United States and North America and the newly established state of Israel, they brought their ideas with them. Moltmann, a German, who was conscripted to fight for the Nazis as a teenager before being captured, followed a similar trajectory to these Jewish intellectuals and had a great impact in the USA and lectured frequently there, having also learned English to a high level at a young age. So that's all he says right there about that part of Moltmann's biography, but that piqued my interest. And so I looked it up a little bit and learned that the theologian Jürgen Moltmann was conscripted into the German army during World War II and was subsequently captured by Allied forces, spending 3 years as a prisoner of war in Belgium. It was during his time as a POW that he began a spiritual transformation after being given a Bible, which helped him find hope and later led him to become a Christian theologian. He was drafted into the German army at the age of 16. He fought on the front lines before being made a prisoner of war by the British in February of 1945. He spent 3 years in a POW camp in Belgium. He describes this experience of being given the Bible as receiving hope after feeling despair and hopelessness. So that's a really interesting story behind this world-famous theologian.
Right.
Marcello continues, because of his life story, Moltmann was also particularly sensitive to the problem of the Holocaust. One can speculate then that part of his interest in Judaism and Jewish ideas more generally was the fruit of these experiences and the realization of what had occurred under Nazism. For this reason, he was ideally positioned to absorb the flow and exchange of ideas around Tikkun Olam, which occurred between Europe and North America in the 20th century. The decimated Jewish communities of post-war continental Europe, on the other hand, do not appear to have contributed substantially to the debate around Tikkun Olam, having lost their most important intellectuals to emigration or death. The notable European but not continental exception is the British rabbi Jonathan Sacks, whom we opened this podcast with, who made important contributions to the development and definition of the idea before and after the turn of the century, indicating a greater vitality in the British Jewish community, which had been less directly affected by the Holocaust. So continuing to move forward in time, we come to the early modern era. To the 17th century, we find Shlomo Marini in his work, Sefer Tikkun Olam, Repair of the World, from 1650. He discussed the messianic vision of peace within creation described in Isaiah 11:6-9, and underlined how this prophecy is linked to Tikkun Olam. So he wrote, "And wolf will dwell with lamb. When humanity will fix its deeds and actions, nature, which became destroyed because of humanity, will be fixed, and it will be restored to its original order. That none would be nourished by eating animals, and none will harm, and none will destroy, neither any human being nor any animal."
That's an interesting translation, right?
Yeah, for 1650, to find this explicitly vegan theology coming out, woven into this idea of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. Marcello goes on, moreover, Marini talks of the eschatological transformation of the world when peace will reign and human beings will be free from the fear of violence and catastrophe.
No more will violence be heard in your land, destruction and shattering in your borders, and you will call salvation your walls and your gates praise. The character of humanity will be repaired, and all the people of the city will pursue justice and uprightness. These with those, and even when they are outside the city, they will be secure from destruction and cataclysm, in the manner that God's salvation and the world's restoration are your walls.
Shlomo Marini helps us to segue, says Marcello, into perhaps the most important context for the development of the contemporary concept of Tikkun Olam. That is what Seidenberg terms religious humanism, linked to Jewish orthodoxy, and which was present in Eastern Europe in the 1700s and 1800s, and deeply influenced Zionism in the early 20th century. We come to Nachman of Breslov in a vision strikingly similar to our modern conception of Tikkun Olam as an activist vision which progressively heals the world. Breslov wrote, "God is good to all, and his mercies are upon all his works." This means God is good to all and gives from his mercies to his creatures, meaning that God causes to flow from his mercies upon all of his creatures so that they too will be merciful with each other for the sake of Tikkun Olam. This concern for animal life that we're starting to see come up with these writers, and creation more generally, though fairly underdeveloped still, anticipates many of the ecological concerns of the 20th century and demonstrates how contemporary activism in favor of environmental problems and against animal cruelty, which have been associated with Tikkun Olam, are not absolute novelties. So he's pointing out how the 21st century understanding of Tikkun Olam that is very ecologically minded and creation care minded, that's not just something new and trendy.
Right.
It's been woven in since the early modern era. It's been explicitly stated. And he points out at this point that Moltmann's theology as well has an emphasis on ecology. In fact, there's a little footnote here. Moltmann in Theology of Hope was already discussing these themes. Quote, "That is why the man who is justified begins to suffer under the contradiction of this world with which he has bodily solidarity. For he must, in obedience, seek the divine righteousness in his body, on earth, and in all creatures." On the other hand, we have a man named Pinchas ben David Sochius. In Sochi's conception, the righteous, with their correct choices, are bringing the world towards its final perfected state, whereas the wicked are destroying it and sending it back to tohu wabohu, the formless emptiness which existed at the beginning of creation.
That's interesting, right? I mean, that's similar to what we talked about with Walton. There's order, and there's people creating, and then there are people destroying, turning things back to chaos. So it's just interesting that
It's certainly how it feels as we try to do good things. It feels like there's forces against us.
yeah.
And then finally, Aaron Shmuel Tamaris, who was from Poland at the beginning of the 20th century, was already underlining Tikkun Olam as the universal mission of Judaism. But an even larger figure who really developed this theme of Tikkun Olam is Abraham Isaac Cook and his universal Tikkun. Abraham Isaac Cook, who lived from 1865 to 1935, was the first Ashkenazi rabbi of British Mandate Palestine. So Ashkenazi Jewishness, if you recall, just refers to European Jewry. And before Israel became modern Israel, the British Empire created a colony there in Palestine, kind of as an outpost to help control India, their colony in India as well. So that was called British Mandated Palestine. It was just basically a British colony. And a lot of Ashkenazi Jews were already coming to Palestine. So the first rabbi there was named Abraham Isaac Cook. And he writes in this section of the really high hopes that many had with coming back to Israel and the idea that they believed that this would be the implementation of a form of socialism based on love as an essential stage in world redemption in Tikkun Olam. It is not possible to repair the world in religious matters before securing for the world economic reparations. So there's also this theme of economic justice as the first and most important step in world repair.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. We came across that a lot with the prophets in reading Rilera,
Right.
where he pointed out that the prophets were saying that economic oppression is the exact same as bloodshed. You're guilty of murder if you're oppressing the poor.
Well, it was interesting too, right? We just watched an interview with Chris Hedges. We learned that I guess he is a ordained Presbyterian minister. And he was essentially saying the same thing. It's what Reverend Martin Luther King said. Like, until there's economic justice, there's really no other kind of justice. I mean, it kind of flows from that. There has to be economic justice. You can't just talk about all these great values, but not do anything about it, right?
I know. Yeah, and Hedges was saying that's what gets people like Martin Luther King killed, is as soon as they start talking about economic equality, economic justice for the poor, that's when they're treading on dangerous ground.
Right.
With the elite.
And I keep referring to that interview. I could throw it in the show notes if anyone's interested.
Yeah, for sure. Cook's peculiar, writes Marcello, Cook's peculiar, even idiosyncratic spirituality led him to always move beyond fixed boundaries and traditional categories of thought in an attempt to bring harmony to the fractured reality of the world. This approach led him not only to champion the cause of the poor and disenfranchised, but also to seek peace with the Arab population. For Cook, the creation of the State of Israel was a foundational event in human history, which marked the beginning of the divine plan for the redemption of the world. It's at this point in reading Marcello that I started to feel a little growing sense of sadness, I think, because he wrote this a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I think if I had read it when he first wrote it, I would have breezed through it without having this sense of sadness. But knowing now what I know, the little bit I know about Israel and the history of Israel and what's been going on, especially the last 2 years in Israel, the fact that these rabbis in the early implementation stages of the colony of Israel, starting with the British colony there, the fact that they believed that this was a turning point in human history, that this was going to usher in a new age of repairing the world, and seeing the state of Israel now, I started to feel like there were such high hopes, such sincere beliefs in Tikkun Olam that it's coming, that we can do this.
Right.
Like this is what God is doing, and the opposite has happened.
Yeah, I just have to wonder, though, too, if there are people who are there who do agree with this assessment, this Tikkun Olam, and are living by it. And unfortunately, they're held hostage, too, to this government.
Yeah.
I don't want to say Zionist government, but
yes,
it's very forceful and aggressive. And we saw that quote again in the Hedges interview where Netanyahu's like, oh, we're authoritarian and we're the new thing. And there's going to be a lot more authoritarian governments coming. Like we're the model almost for the way the world's going. And
yes, it has gotten me thinking about how colonists can view what they're doing compared to the people who were there before the colonists view what they're doing. Like, and it makes me think of the United States.
Well, I was just saying that's America, Manifest Destiny.
I mean, we created these little colonies with towns like Salem, which means peace on earth. We came here thinking that we were creating heaven on earth while we're kicking out and displacing and killing the indigenous people who were here. It's a very interesting mindset historically that has repeated itself. But let's keep going. Likewise, according to Cook, Tikkun Olam was not just an inner spirituality that through piety and observance could help heal the world, but needed to be transformed into practical messianic activism which would begin to usher in the new age of the cosmos. Cook's theology was an inversion of typical religious reasoning. Instead of spirituality seeking to escape world, a truly spiritual tikkun necessarily brought about the physical reordering of the cosmos in all its dimensions. Cook himself underlined how any idea that abandons restoration of the world and the ordering of states and floats in the spiritual air alone and takes glory in the power of fixing souls and their success only is founded upon a lie that has no legs to stand on. Cook said it was precisely Judaism's ability to overcome the dualism of human existence which distinguished it from Gentile thought.
Newell continues on. A particularly eclectic and unique figure, Cook combined great religious study with humanistic ideals from a large array of sources. This was due, at least in part, to his theology, which believed that divine sparks of truth were dissipated throughout the world in human learning and needed to be recuperated and reintegrated into Judaism. For Cook, human beings had an innate sense of beauty, truth, and goodness, which he termed nature, and which religion needed to expand upon as opposed to crushing.
Yeah, he's a really interesting figure. I like his thinking that he was very broad in his thinking. He said all groups, whether secular or religious, would ultimately come together, healing and completing each other in the final Tikkun Olam. He brought together the Kabbalistic conception of Tikkun, the universalism of the Elenu prayer, the Hasidic and rabbinical idea of daily devotion and service to others which repair the world, and finally the humanistic, Zionist, and socialist ideas which were particularly prominent in the late 19th and 20th centuries. What we have is perhaps the first truly modern synthesis of the concept, which had been anticipated in a more fragmentary way in the humanistic orthodoxy of Eastern European Jewry, in which Cook was raised.
Yeah, I get the sense, too, in reading Newell's assessment of Cook, that he was a bit of a diplomat, right? And I guess if you're going to build a country, you know you're going to get all kinds of people with different views and beliefs, and you're going to have to unify all of them.
Yeah, it's particularly interesting that he was interested in creating peace with the Arab world.
Right.
I mean, there has been that sentiment within Zionism from its beginning. It just seems like those ideas were overwhelmed by the other ideas that we can never create peace with the Arab world.
Yeah.
Cook's paradigm moves from personal transformation to the repair of the cosmos, which helped to lay the foundations for the contemporary understanding of the term Tikkun Olam. Cook's lifelong quest to overcome every dualism and bring the unity which he saw as the foundation of Judaism and the Torah meant that even the Kabbalah's understanding of Tikkun as an inner and then otherworldly redemption centered on Jewish personal devotion needed to be modified in favor of Tikkun, which transforms and repairs the present world of space and time and reaches beyond the confines of both Judaism and religious practice into the non-Jewish world. This included even the secular spheres of politics, economics, sociality, and creation. While not always mentioned directly, there is the impression that Cook's influence is always lurking under the surface in later discussions of Tikkun Olam, his interpretation having become almost part and parcel of the concept. Newell's next section is subtitled Mordecai Kaplan, Repairing of America. So we're going to see how this understanding of Tikkun Olam finally made its way to North America Jewry. So Mordecai Kaplan lived from 1881 to 1983. He was over 100 years old.
Wow.
Kaplan believed strongly in the value of America with its culture and traditions, and at times he may have even considered abandoning his concept of a Jewish civilization and focusing on the United States as the agent for his hopes for the positive transformation of the world.
Wow.
So we have Eastern European Jewry going to Israel, thinking that the state of Israel, or the colony at that time of Israel, was going to bring about Tikkun Olam, repairing of the world.
Right.
Then we have Jewry coming to the United States and being enamored with the values of the United States and thinking that the United States was going to usher in.
Right. And you got the sense, too, right? After World War II, Holocaust, and America and the Allies had a part in rescuing or stopping that level of fascism. And so a lot of these people immigrated to the United States. And so, of course, I think they resonate with this wonderful place and they saved us. And these values are real.
Yeah. For these reasons, Kaplan sought to fuse American and Jewish values in the form of a civil religion. In his view, Jews had a positive role to play by helping to guarantee America's democratic institutions, which they could also improve and enrich through their distinctive heritage, moral values, and religious vision.
Moreover, for Kaplan, perfecting the world consisted in human flourishing in all its dimensions and the realization of human potential. From this point of view, the traditional religious objective of perfecting the world under the kingdom of the Almighty must mean the establishment of a social order that combines the maximum of individual self-realization with the maximum social cooperation. In this sense, Kaplan believed that each human being should have the fullest opportunity for self-realization, adequate food and rest, economic security, healthy living conditions, and health care, but also the possibility of aesthetic enjoyment and creativity, the opportunity of exercising one's procreative powers, as well as the initiative and responsibility for the improvement and transformation of the society in which one lives. For Kaplan, the transcendent forms of religion had made the error of projecting the kingdom of God into the future without understanding that it was humanity's task to bring about the world to come.
According to Kaplan, traditional religion's vision of the world as evil and dominated by spiritual powers of darkness had, instead of seeking to transform the world, led to various forms of asceticism, seen in both Roman Catholic monasticism and in radical Protestantism, e.g. Anabaptist, withdrawal from politics and society, but also in Judaism's separation from the world around it and its inner devotion to Torah study. So he's criticizing this separation mentality that we see in monasticism, Anabaptism, and even within Judaism.
Yeah.
He's saying that we need to engage in politics. We need to engage in society. We need to be the bringers about of goodness within these institutions. We move to the section titled Tikkun Olam in the United States. Marcello begins with the educator Alexander Dushkin, who was a follower of Mordecai Kaplan. In 1942, Dushkin, then executive director of the Jewish Education Committee of New York, at the annual National Conference for Jewish Education, read out aloud a paper entitled Democracy and Jewish Education. This paper, which was published soon after in the Journal of Jewish Education, proposed a view of Jewish education strongly linked to American democracy and its values, seeing the Constitution, American democracy, and the Torah as allied in their defense of the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and equality before the law. For Dushkin, while containing a different form of language, the Bible expressed the same concepts, and the idea of human rights more generally, through the ideas of justice and righteousness, freedom and loving kindness, via the concept of human beings made in the image of God, and finally mirrored the idea of the pursuit of happiness through the prophetic vision of the end of times or latter days, in which peace and joy would prevail. Furthermore, Dushkin underlined how, in what appears to echo aspects of Kaplan's thought, while democracy grounds its social relationships on the dignity of the individual, his rights to creative self-expression and social service, on the other hand, the Torah bases it on the conception of man as both a child of God and partner of the Almighty in Tikkun Olam.
Newell continues on. Here, in one of the first direct quotations of Tikkun Olam in the modern American context, Dushkin linked the term to democracy, human rights, social change, and the vision of partnering with God in the task of reconstructing or transforming the world. As mentioned earlier, Kaplan's influence is evident, especially in Dushkin's pairing of the Torah and American democracy and values, such as the Constitution of the United States. Moreover, the historical context of the Second World War meant that from its infancy in the American context, Tikkun Olam was associated with liberal American democracy against totalitarianism, and no doubt in contrast especially to Nazism.
Yeah, again, as I'm reading this, I'm just having this growing sense of sadness,
Yeah.
which is not at all what I expected when you're reading a paper about the theology of hope,
Right.
that you're actually feeling sad. But again, these high hopes for Israel, these high hopes for the United States, and these ideals of personal freedom, individual rights, in today's context feels especially sad.
Right.
But moving on, he talks about in the 1960s, the conservative Rabbi Harold Schulweis followed Dushkin in helping to popularize Tikkun Olam in the American context. So Schulweis was the leader of Valley Beth Shalom in California. And he talked a lot about the imago Dei of human beings, which he said meant that they had the responsibility and the moral standing to be partners with God in the transformation of the world. He said that this was part of life, and it was also part of Judaism's struggle against the disharmony of the world. Schulweis examined Tikkun Olam and how Tikkun Olam, and this is a quote by Schulweis, Tikkun Olam, the improvement of this world expresses the theistic humanism and activism of our tradition. As men and women of faith, we cannot enjoy the luxury of passive judgment upon history. We are children of the prophets, creating conditions for a better future. We are not slaves of history. We use history to break the bonds of historic fatalism, for man is both creature and creator. He can help change the world and himself as well. And this, he points out how this is in contrast to the fatalism of other religious traditions. So fatalism, nihilism comes up in this paper too. Those are always terms that I'm always like, what does that mean exactly? Fatalism is a belief that events are predetermined or inevitable, which breeds indifference and submission. And you find that within evangelicalism as well, this idea that the sovereignty of God, that things are predetermined, that they're inevitable, or even just a fatalism that the world is always going to be what it is. It's always corrupt. It's always bad. And it breeds this indifference. And you see that creeping in to our hearts all the time. But he's saying we're not slaves to history. We're the children of prophets. We're here to make history. So, yeah, breaking the bonds of this fatalism that so often shows up within religious traditions.
Well, and it just reminds me again of how much empire and governments use propaganda daily to tell us what our reality is, right?
Yeah.
So we're fighting against an ideological conception of reality every day.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really think about it, the amount of money that goes into convincing us of the way the world is.
Right. And it's our duty to remember the prophetic tradition, right? The prophets, they had a dynamic understanding of God and the future. And they believed that Yahweh was concerned about injustice. Yeah, this is where I start to think about even Akbar Ali, like his utopia building, this idea of kingdom building. I think that comes up in here. We're going to read it. This idea that you have to continue to imagine in detail the kingdom and just continue to believe, continue to have that hope. Next, we reach Greenberg. Irving Greenberg was an important rabbi in post-war America. Greenberg believed that Judaism was to achieve, quote, infinite goals in finite steps. And I do like that phrase. We have infinite goals and we have to take finite steps. He has a quote here by Greenberg. God summons humanity to participate in the process of creating a redeemed world. Each partner enters into this treaty of total redemption. Each brings a pledge to this binding covenant. God pledges that seeking perfection is not an exercise in futility. God promises to accompany humanity every step of the way. The human partner pledges to start the process of redemption in his or her lifetime, to create life and pass on the vision and the responsibility to the next generation, and to not relent until the final goal is reached. Again, Greenberg affirms how living the Jewish way means dreaming a dream of total perfection so vivid that you can almost touch it, while affirming and working with what is in order to make the dream come true. The lifestyle designed to teach hope and pass it on. There's so much in there that I've been thinking about the last few days, that even just this idea that we have to create this world and then we have to pass on the vision and the responsibility to the next generation.
Yeah.
Because I was just thinking how often you see someone does amazing kingdom building in this world, and then the next generation comes up and doesn't share the same vision.
Right.
And they basically undo all the work that was done before them. It's the responsibility of every generation to catch the vision.
It just occurred to me, though, but I wonder if that has some sense to do with the way we like to make heroes. We have all this hero worship, and we have people then building their legacies as opposed to just transferring the legacy. Do you know what I mean? Like, we sort of frame somebody and then we make them a hero. We give them these awards and all these accolades, and then they pass on and maybe their legacy doesn't pass on. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like we do that to people. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
It's not completely true, but
It needs to be the vision and the work rather than adulating a particular human,
yeah.
maybe. Yeah. For Greenberg, Judaism was able to avoid both the dangerous excesses of violent revolution and the contented indifference of the status quo. And I found that particularly interesting too, that this view of Tikkun Olam, this view of kingdom building, of repairing the world, has to avoid both the dangerous excesses of violent revolution and the contented indifference to the status quo. We can't resort to violence, and we can't resort to just indifference. We have to find this middle path of just having this hope and doing the work and believing that we can fix the world.
It's a tough place to be, though. It just reminds me of, the theology of Martin Luther, and the sense I got from him from taking church history is that he's always living in this tension, right? He hasn't succumbed to the world, and he's not avoiding the world like the Anabaptists, but he's right in the middle of it. And it's a hard place to be every day.
Yeah. And I'm still very curious and undecided as to whether the Anabaptist view of life or this totally engaged in human institutions way of life is the way to go.
Right.
And we can talk more about that.
But I think there's three views. There's the Anabaptist, there's the totally succumbing to the powers and engaging with empire and being a part of it. And then there's this in the middle Luther view of culturally being different, but living in the world, but pushing against it.
Yes.
In every arena.
But even specifically in the political sphere.
Right.
We have often been like, maybe our only responsibility is maybe to vote. But other than that, we should be just living our lives, because the political machine is never, like the Anabaptist view is the kingdom, the empire, its only weapon is violence. And so to try to fix the world through empire.
Right.
Right. There's that view, which I kind of resonate with. But then there's this view that we're reading these people had, that no, we need to be in the machine, driving the machine.
Right.
And we can do this. So, yeah, let's go on. But it's definitely a question I have.
No, as do I. And that's why I feel like maybe my view, not that it matters, would be we live in the world, we're engaged with the world, but I see it more as, instead of political, more cultural, like we're just pushing against the culture. And through that, we change the world. But yeah, whatever. Yeah, it's frustrating. Newell continues on. Likewise, for Greenberg, a post-Holocaust view of redemption had to be accompanied by an incredible outburst of life and redeeming work in the world, in which the focus is in the mundane world of society building, social justice, and human politics. Greenberg's message for Tikkun Olam was very influential and was embraced by those who went on to be the heads of major Jewish organizations in the 1980s and 1990s. like the director of UJA, United Jewish Appeal, John Rushke, who had been part of the Jewish counterculture and in the 1970s had been the vice president of the National Jewish Resource Center. Furthermore, Greenberg helped to found the CLAL in 1974, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership, which became an important influence within the Jewish world and Jewish organizations. In fact, Greenberg became the most popular speaker within Federation events and helped to teach an entire generation of Jewish leaders essential Jewish values, including Tikkun Olam. In this way, the concept entered into mainstream Jewish religious, social, and political discourse and began to be used in the slogans and material of various organizations. Greenberg saw the strength of Judaism in its holding together both idealism and realism.
Marcello continues, the Havurah movement fellowship was also important in the dissemination of Tikkun Olam in the American context. This countercultural Jewish movement, which was inspired by Mordecai Kaplan's teachings, was formed in the 1960s and 70s, believed in informal meetings, and espoused a series of progressive causes. They adopted 60s-era ideals, including egalitarianism, informality, cohesive community, active participatory prayer, group discussion, and unconventional forms of governance. The Havurah movement spread its ideas through the so-called Jewish catalog, a do-it-yourself kit, which followed in the footsteps of the earlier Whole Earth catalog, a countercultural magazine focused on ecology and sustainability, a wildly popular book that popularized Jewish countercultural ideas, including Tikkun Olam. This served as a vehicle for transmitting the innovations pioneered by pockets of creative students, chiefly in Boston and New York, to Jews throughout North America and beyond. These included words like tzedakah, kavanah, intentionality, and Tikkun Olam. So he's really convincing here that this phrase, this concept, Tikkun Olam, became very mainstream within American Judaism. We get to Rabbi Gerald Sarata. When describing what Tikkun Olam entailed, Sarata underlined the just ordering of society and use of natural resources, and highlighted themes like economic justice, ecological concerns, energy policy, world hunger, intergroup relations, women's rights, peace in the Middle East, and Jewish education. Sarata founded this organization called the New Jewish Agenda, or NJA, which went on to affirm a whole panoply of progressive social, economic, ecological, and political causes, but was disbanded in 1992 for lack of funds, an overly dispersive agenda, as well as a general shift in the political and cultural climate. Again, it just makes me sad.
Right.
There's these organizations that rise up, led by these people, that are so visionary and exciting and bringing about goodness in the world. And then they fall apart. People lose interest.
Yeah.
Marcello does tie in Moltmann here. Moltmann recuperated Greenberg and Sarata's together with Bloch's emphasis on human responsibility and secular activism. He also maintained as central to his theology a supernatural conception of both the resurrection and the parousia, which allows his eschatology to remain hopeful for a final redemption of the world, even in the face of human limitations and historical failures. While Greenberg's influence over the concept of Tikkun Olam is quite overt and explicit, the influence of Havurah, Sarata, and the NJA appears to have been more subtle and indirect while still leaving a lasting mark on the concept. The association of these countercultural and progressive American movements with Tikkun Olam meant that the term became linked to leftist and ecological causes, as well as to young and budding countercultural issues. The next subheading is learner and the entertainment industry, the mainstreaming of Tikkun. Tikkun Olam reached mainstream American political discourse in part through the work of Rabbi Michael Lerner, who founded Tikkun magazine in 1986. The magazine had a strong leftist progressive flavor and sought to combine social justice, ecology, and spirituality. in what was envisioned as a leftist alternative to the rise of the religious right. We're very familiar with the rise of the religious right, or
Right.
somewhat familiar.
Yeah.
We definitely were brought up in it. Well, at the same time, there was this Tikkun magazine, which was seen as a leftist alternative.
Right.
The religious right had come to prominence in that period, founded as a direct alternative to the neoconservative magazine Commentary. Tikkun magazine followed in the footsteps of Sarada's progressive social vision, and each edition contained the definition of tikkun as to mend, repair, and transform the world. Furthermore, Lerner saw his magazine as a continuation of the Jewish prophetic tradition. In this sense, Lerner linked his work to the concept of the Exodus in the Old Testament and the liberation of the oppressed, which he saw at the heart of Judaism.
Newell continues on, for Lerner, the slave rebellion, the Jewish exodus, lies at the heart of the Jewish religion and is a sign that gives hope that the world's histories of oppression can be interrupted. Lerner also criticized North American progressives, although his criticism is directed primarily against the Democratic Party in the U.S. for having often denigrated the transcendent aspects of reality, thereby leaving the religious right a monopoly on religion and spirituality. That is interesting, right, in the United States, because there became this religious right political thing, and they were like the only people being religious, I mean, on a popular level.
Yep.
Versus everyone else. And there became these dichotomies.
Yeah.
Very simplistic.
So he's kind of saying, why are you allowing the Republicans, the religious right, to have a monopoly on all things transcendent, all things spiritual, right?
Right. And again, it wasn't true, but it was the popular level, the populist sense. And and then, we find out that even the Clintons in the 1990s ended up reading Lerner's magazine, Tikkun magazine. And then, we see this phrase gets into speeches by Governor Cuomo and even the president who brought us the audacity of hope, Barack Obama.
Yeah, and as we go through this little subsection, it becomes clear that Marcello is showing us how this mainstreaming of the phrase, Tikkun Olam, the power behind the concept starts to get hollowed out. It starts to become this hollow slogan that just starts getting thrown around as kind of a trendy thing to say without its real meaning. It starts to become even a marketing gimmick. It's almost like coding that people would, artists and celebrities and politicians would throw into their speeches or their art or their music as a way of being like, I'm with you, Jews. I'm one of you. I'm on your side, without having any real meaning.
Right.
He talks about how even Madonna on one of her albums had a lot of Kabbalistic imagery in her videos and was kind of referencing this idea of Tikkun Olam without any real substance. And then especially he points out in late 20th century California, in that context, the idea was starting to be trivialized. Instead of being about socialism and political transformation, it was injected with this new age self-help elements. And instead of mystically transforming the world through deep inner conversion and rigorous prayer and study and love for one's neighbor and obedience to the Torah, the focus was now on how the Kabbalah could unlock the secret to one's personal prosperity and success. There was the Kabbalah Center in Los Angeles, which has been strongly criticized by both Jewish rabbis and secular sources as a religious scam. So it started to become part of just the modern consumer spirituality. Marcello concludes this section by saying, by the early 2000s, Tikkun Olam was now largely severed from its Jewish origins, and free-floating appears to have become an empty soundbite and a marketing tool for the entertainment industry. It's a trivialization of Tikkun Olam. But he's saying, even though that happened, there's still value in the concept that we need to reclaim.
Right.
He has a section here titled Barack Obama, the Tikkun Olam president.
Yeah.
Like so many of us, and I count myself in this, so many of us were very hopeful when Obama became president. And, and maybe it sounds similar to what a lot of people say about Trump, like people who support Trump. Like there's this belief, there's this hope within the heart that here's a president who's going to be different. Here's a president who's going to break with the status quo and do something new. I mean, he was all about hope and yes, we can.
Right.
So Marcello points out that he has counted roughly 7 recorded instances in which Barack Obama openly invoked Tikkun Olam in different speeches before his presidency and during his presidency, starting in Nashua, New Hampshire, at his primary concession speech. He highlighted themes of hope and change and his political commitments. He rallied the crowd with his Yes, We Can slogan, which he connected powerfully to Tikkun Olam. Yes, we can to justice and equality. Yes, we can to opportunity and prosperity, and on it goes.
Right.
And a lot of these speeches in which he invoked Tikkun Olam were given, of course, to AIPAC.
Right.
Which I would not want to give the impression that he was the only president who gave many speeches at AIPAC. They all have.
Right.
They all do. And at these speeches for AIPAC, which is the Israel's arm of lobbying, political lobbying in the United States, and has enormous power
Right.
over politicians in our country, he would invoke Tikkun Olam.
Right. Several different speeches at AIPAC. 100%. And no, I remember the times when he was his first campaign, Barack Obama's first campaign, and just the hope and it's almost like he was the Messiah, right? It was that intense in America. And the funny thing is yes, is Barack Obama, he's a great orator. He's a gentleman. He's diplomatic. He's all the things you want in a president compared to what we have now. I mean, there's a very stark difference. And I feel like you can be proud of the way Barack Obama carries himself. But then, of course, you look back and, of course, I'm a big fan of Noam Chomsky and people like him. And someone like Noam Chomsky would say, and he would ask the question, like, what did Barack Obama accomplish? What did he do? And there's really not much of a legacy. And you can make all kinds of arguments that he had a Republican Congress and blah, 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 or whatever it may be. And then when you really look into it, he did a lot of the things that Republicans do. In some ways, he was no different. And this is the problem with politics in the United States. We act like we have 2 parties when, in fact, we have one big party. Anyway, long story short, I just wonder if the whole concept of Tikkun Olam got gutted as well. Like there was this language of hope, but in reality, there was not much.
I don't know, because I want to believe that Obama, especially at the beginning, was very sincere. Marcello writes of how he was very influenced by James Cone. And Cone wrote the book Black Theology and Black Power, a Black Theology of Liberation as well. And he wrote a third book, God of the Oppressed, which directly quotes Moltmann's Theology of Hope. So
Right.
Once again, there's this intellectual genealogy going on where, Moltmann is quoting Cone, Cone's quoting Moltmann, Barack's influenced by Cone. He writes in a footnote, Moltmann even mentioned Obama briefly in his 2019 book, The Spirit of Hope, in regard to the threat of nuclear war. And then also there was Jeremiah Wright, who strongly influenced James Cone and Black liberation theology.
I can believe that idealistically, Barack Obama believed in these liberation theology, Black liberation theology, James Cone theology, Moltmann theology. I also just believe that once you rise to that level of politics, you become somewhat of a diplomat and you realize you can't, somehow it gets in your head that you can't push this stuff too hard. And so it ended up going nowhere.
I know, which just feels devastating. There's a footnote here that's quoting Cone, who wrote, the German theologian Jürgen Moltmann has surprisingly caught the spirit of Black slave preachers. Hope, then, as seen in the minds of slave preachers, is not patience, but impatience, not calmness, but protest. As Moltmann says, those who hope in Christ can no longer put up with reality as it is, but begin to suffer under it, to contradict it. Peace with God means conflict with the world. And Moltmann writes, the connection would therefore be Moltmann influenced Cone, who influenced Wright, who influenced Obama.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I'm trying to remember something happened recently with Trump, and people were looking for a leader on the other side to like stand up and like push back, and people were looking to Obama, and someone called him out, some journalist. I can't remember the specifics, but I remember there was like silence, and we're all just shaking our heads like, what in the world? And eventually now you're starting to see Obama speak up a little bit, but it's like he made a comment like, I'm retired. Like, really? Like the world's going to hell and you're retired. Okay. Sounds great. Thank you. Thanks for your service.
So clearly it's easy to feel hopeless.
Yeah.
And the challenge, the discipline is to keep the hope alive, even when being a realist about human failings and humans disappointing us and
Right.
and even humans' best work, best intentions, best visions, best efforts so often fizzle out.
Right.
Like we have to continue to keep hope. And this is why, like, yeah, I mean, I picked Kevin up from work after finishing this reading, and I even was starting to cry because that was the sense I had is look at all these people who thought they could do this with God's help and didn't.
Right.
And why does it feel like this is the story of our human history? Like we try and we do our best and we're trying to fix the world. We're trying to repair the world and it doesn't really get anywhere.
Right. But I also feel like I just want to make a comment that, you know, in light of the protest that just happened this past weekend, the No Kings protest, you heard people say we need to save ourselves, like the governments aren't going to save us. And so I just wonder, that just inspires in me a sense of like, yeah, this is our mandate. This is our creation mandate to become image bearers, that each one of us contributes to solving this. And we don't rely on a representative government to do it.
Marcello finishes this section going back to Sachs. He says, Sachs, with whom I started this historical overview, again summarizes well the basic meaning Tikkun Olam had assumed at the beginning of the 21st century in Jewish thought. And this is Sachs. To be a Jew is to be an agent of hope. Every ritual, every command, every syllable of the Jewish story is a protest against escapism, resignation, and the blind acceptance of fate. Judaism, the religion of the free God, is a religion of freedom. Jewish faith is written in the future tense. It is belief in a future that is not yet, but could be. If we heed God's call, obey his will, and act together as a covenantal community, the name of the Jewish future is hope. Mm. Yeah, you mentioned that interview that Mark Hill did with Chris Hedges on Al Jazeera in January of 2025. And we watched that entire interview. I had seen clips here and there, but I had never sat down and watched the entire interview as it was broadcast. And at the end, Mark Hill asked Chris Hedges, like, are you hopeful that the prophetic voice will rise up? And he said, honestly, given where he sees we are, he feels fairly pessimistic with what's going to happen next. But he then said, and I wrote it down, so this is pretty much a quote from Chris Hedges. He said, that's where I fall back on my religious tradition. You, meaning Mark, you come out of the Black prophetic tradition. If anyone understood the world around them and the forces against them, it was the Black prophetic tradition, but they fought anyway. Because it wasn't what they achieved empirically, it was who they were. It was their own dignity. We have to protect our own dignity. The soul is real, and if we don't stand up against these rapacious forces of radical evil, our soul will die. And we may not win, but we must save our soul. So that speaks very powerfully to how we're feeling after reading this, that it's about who we are. Right. Like to give up hope doesn't seem like an option, even though there's a pull in that direction. We have to be who we are and we have to continue to work. And you pointed out, Kevin, that this reminds you of what Lisa Kemmerer responded when we were asking her, how do you keep going? How do you not get discouraged? And she was just like, I go outside, spend time with my dogs, and I just keep going.
Right.
I don't count the cost. I don't look for the results. I just keep going.
Right. No, I hear you. This is good. I get it. This might sound like a depressing episode. I think there's hope to come in future episodes here. And
yes.
I think next episode, this was kind of a historical survey to give us a sense of how this Tikkun Olam phrase has been used historically. And then it gets reinvigorated by Moltmann. And I think next episode, we're going to start digging into Moltmann's theology and Tikkun Olam and repairing the world and building an activist faith, an activist paradigm.
I'd like to close with a prayer, if I could. I wrote this after reading this section. So if you could pray with me. God, we seek your kingdom. We work for the kingdom. We shine your light in the world. We regularly get discouraged. Sometimes the good we do seems as insignificant as a pure drop of water dropped into the cesspool. Sometimes it seems that the forces of violence, hatred, corruption more than cancel out any good we manage to do. Our light feels swallowed up by the black hole. Things break down, things fall apart so quickly, so easily. Order and mercy and beauty come with such effort, and our pie pastry fragile. One individual rises up and brings your kingdom to their corner of the planet, and then they sell out. Or the next generation takes the light and order they brought back to the formless and the void. Yes, we can becomes, but we didn't. Kingdom building so often feels like 2 steps forward and at least 2 steps back. We look around and your kingdom seems as far away as it's ever been. In our grief, keep us out of the gravitational pull of nihilism, the submission to fatalism. Keep the flame of hope alive deep within us. I step outside in the October golden hour. Your light reflects off the new snow on the bridgers. Your light reflects off and illuminates the multicolored autumn leaves. Your clouds in the blue. Your coolness on my skin. Your geese launch themselves from the pond, calling to each other, and fly over my head. Geese on earth. Goodwill to all mortal flesh. Such effortless, abundant beauty, I can't begin to take it all in. Everywhere I look, there's more. Is your kingdom already here? How can your kingdom feel simultaneously not here and right here? Never and already. Impossible and guaranteed. We are your subjects, O King. When we pray, your kingdom come, your will be done, we are promising as your subjects to devote our lives to bring your kingdom, to devote our lives to accomplishing your will. Help us shine your light in all this darkness. Please help us repair your world. Amen.
Amen. See you guys next time.
Bye, everybody. Have a good day.